Hello, this is your pirate speaking. And so, as a mode of reception, this is Claire Fontaine, as interviewed by John Kelsey.
Claire Fontaine doesn't especially describe herself as a fiction. She's not meant to be a female character.
Claire Fontaine describes itself as a fiction and as a ready-made artist. What does it mean from the perspective of subjectivity to say that a contemporary artist has become something like a urinal or a Brillo box?
Claire Fontaine doesn't especially describe herself as a fiction. She's not meant to be a female character with a face, specific characteristics, or moods. She's a fiction in the way any proper name is a fiction. You use the strategy of the pseudonym yourself, and on two fronts even, with Bernad Corporation and Rena Spallings. These two names designate two spheres of collective activity that do not necessarily conform to the formats imposed by the notions artist collective or the gallery, etc. Giving a name to a collective practice, signing certain things Claire Fontaine instead of the Ramones, Luther Blissett, or the Red Brigades is very real. We do this is to make it explicit that our works and actions come from here, from us. We are locatable and accessible, not invisible or mysterious. Somehow, using the name Claire Fontaine is more precise than signing the names of the people implicated in the work, because what we produce is quantitatively and qualitatively different than the sum of our individual practices. For us, the creative process is primarily a form of participation, and it involves quite a few gregarious components. It's the result of a lot of compromise and questioning, and that reinforces the work. That's also why we talk about Claire Fontaine's assistants. Claire Fontaine is composed only of assistants. Its management is an empty center. Next, there's this fact of being a ready-made artist. Well, this doesn't just concern Claire Fontaine. Underlying this, we say we are all ready-made artists, just as in France in '68 they said we're all German Jews. Wanting to be an artist today comes down to putting yourself in a strange situation, like that of some object that is suddenly declared a work of art. The subjectification of contemporary beings is submitted to all forms of monitoring and formatting. This is not meant as a catastrophic statement. Old forms of containment are still disintegrating, but they continue to act upon us. Work, family, fatherland, prison, psychiatric hospital. And on top of that, for the past 30 years, we've been carrying the entire weight of targeted and socializing merchandise, with the new communication technologies at the forefront, the effects of the crisis of institutions, neo-illiteracy, everything falling under the auspices of psychiatry, zero tolerance, poverty. In short, the aborted promises of the 1970s liberated nothing. But all sorts of existential and social disasters have developed, and all of them within a relational space that was already too limited in 1968 and has only shrunk since. That makes for an awful lot of standardization of subjectivities. At this point, the art world finds itself populated by more or less political refugees coming from all kinds of other professional realms, and of course by people who always wanted to be artists too. But at the moment, there's still no place to cultivate one's own exception. Fear has eaten away at the soul of whatever it is that used to make Western cities attractive. They've become shopping centers where everything has a price and fewer things are left to chance. Anything that adventure subtracts from private property has the lifeblood sucked out of it by misery and need. Squats, collectives, or occupied houses, all of these experiences have become painfully difficult and harshly repressed. It's hard to keep laboratories of subjectivity open in these conditions because people always come together in normed contexts. Who hasn't overheard this discussion? Where do we go? Berlin? Barcelona? New York? Istanbul? The desire to belong to an alterity expresses itself to flee, to no longer be socially controlled and economically abandoned at the same time here. One of the serious problems artists face is that the world that was supposed to shelter them has been devoured, and even the melancholy that streams from that fact is no longer a source of inspiration. Listening to Debord whining about destroyed Paris and vanished hoodlums can get on anyone's nerves nowadays. The artist is henceforth subject to the same conditioning and the same working rhythms as all the other producers, the poverty and experience included.
So, given that you're a collective practice, an artist populated by more than one, does the division of labor and what you produce become an aspect of the work itself? Because it seems to me that your work has tended to hide its own realization in any productive relation from which it could flow or it could depend upon.
The division of labor is the fundamental problem of our work. Claire Fontaine grew out of the impossibility of accepting the division between intellectual and manual work. The art world is best adapted for fleeing this sort of hierarchy. Other sets of problems arise afterwards because it is no longer possible for anyone to be self-sufficient, and so there's the subcontracting of certain parts of the work's monetary relations. These are the terrifying dramas of capitalism, and they are simultaneously present in the form and the content of what we make. Unresolved questions function as the motor and carburetor of our artistic productions. We say all the time that if we could get down to changing the state of things, we wouldn't make art. But I think your question refers to an old discussion we had where you upheld that the content of an artistic work does not determine its political position and that its strategic choices compromise its effectiveness and its coherence. I'm not sure that the attempt to extract contradictions through a position of purity is very fruitful. Claire Fontaine doesn't believe in exemplarity and the political and social relationships that flow from it, even if it weaves political alliances and friendships without which it couldn't go on all the time. Claiming that Claire Fontaine is a ready-made artist, among other means, for example, that it will never say, "You're on the shit, we're right," what would be the point? Do you really want to be joined by people you scorn? Do you want to convert people to your political or artistic position because of their admiration for you? Because they secretly feel inferior and wish they were like you? Claire Fontaine seeks to produce horizontal relationships, which has become very difficult, for example, within militant spaces. But these are always, of course, relationships in a confined space. The class division of society has become even more strict. It's idiotic to think that you can undo it with good intentions or that you can extract yourself from it. It already takes a considerable effort to constantly present it as a problem and a certain modesty with regard to what we produce and the situations in which we produce. We're not hiding very much. Perhaps the conservative aspect of our work and the fact that we attempt to preserve the social and material conditions that allow us to work, and we work for that. It's the vicious cycle that only a revolution can break.
Certain texts by Claire Fontaine contain theorizations on strategies, such as the human strike and the aggressive silences Italian feminists assumed during the 70s. How does non-production function in your work? Where exactly does it not function?
It functions like an omnipresent horizon one never reaches. Let me explain. The concept of human strike, as well as the feminist aggressive silences, were born out of militant contexts, in which some mobilize in order to block total mobilization. The human strike is meant to reveal the way in which the temporality of struggles is conditioned and colonized by the official temporality, and also with regards to effects, behaviors, daily existence, in short. Unfortunately, interruption and non-production are not always options. The human strike is a singular or mass form of behavior meant to break a harmful and politically reactionary dynamic. It changes according to circumstances. Most often, this translates into zealous action, even if punctually. Silent persistence, opposition to those who claim to love us and act with our best interests in mind, is already difficult and exhausting enough. Refusal is very important, vital, but after its refusal, it's constructive action that poses new problems. Because, for example, in the 70s, once the feminists succeeded in explaining to mixed-gender militant groups that their public words were empty, incoherent, bureaucratic, or whatever, the groups disbanded. And now it's often said that the feminists screwed up the revolutionary dynamic, when this had been the result of a repressive wave of police action that was disproportionate to the forces of the movement. The human strike is not a solution, it is an additional problem, for those who practice it and for those who are subjected to it. But it's a displacement of the problem. In hypnosis, for example, one of the therapeutic options is to displace the patient's symptoms through orders given during sleep. The symptom then appears in an unusual situation and moment, and it suddenly seems incongruous to the sick person. Most often, their first reflex is therefore one of not succumbing to this untimely symptom, of controlling it, and through that they discover a new capacity, a strength they didn't think that they had.
But how can we interrupt anything in the contemporary art world today? Art circulates at a growing rate of speed, perfectly synchronized with the movement of capital and information.
The contemporary art world is several different worlds at once, all of which are concealed in the large stomach and intestine of capital. Without even criticizing the criteria that one has to fulfill and the caudine forks one has to traverse in order to take part in the visible surfaces of this world, we can say more basically that everything that circulates in this society depends on economic flux. So, how could art be an exception? There is, however, a strange connection between libidinal and monetary economy in the art world, which goes beyond the simple question of fetishism, and it's quite fascinating. There are surely things that could be done with this specific state of desire. If flattery and provocation were the two pillars of the avant-gardes of the last century, two ways of relating to old forms of power, we've now entered into a period in which one has to interfere with the concerns of those who govern and those who are governed. Through all that, art doesn't interrupt anything. It only expresses things that would otherwise be drowned out or simplified. It saves phenomena from the digestion and expulsion of the signifying field. Everything that appears as professionally connoted doesn't interrupt anything at all, and that's clear since the defeat of the workers' movement. The interruptions will come from elsewhere, and for us, making art is a way of staying awake until those moments occur. We will accompany them wherever they manifest themselves. Producing them is not our ambition nor our power.
What's the intention behind the sentence, "We are all bad consumers," painted on Warhol's Marylands? A lot of contemporary art doesn't only situate itself within the field of consumption, but, in reality, proposes art as a unique style of consumption in itself. The ready-made pop art appropriation, these are also many practical lessons for the consumers that we all are, striking examples of brilliant, perverse, or simply good value shopping techniques.
The diptych, "We are all ready-made artists," and "We are all bad consumers," which uses Maryland as a support, is an example of the problems polysemy raises. At the beginning, we were thinking about the slogans, "We are all German Jews," and what it meant in '68. That during the war, we were all in danger, political victims, that we were all in solidarity with those who were exterminated and their loved ones. In fact, I think it was a gesture of desubjectivization. In our case, desubjectivization can henceforth only occur in a very controlled space, in a veritable slice of the market. At present, consumption is no longer an activity in itself. It coincides with the unfolding of our lives. It is not a choice or a pleasure. It is also a practice that interfaces with production in a sadly complementary and less dialectical manner. From the moment that consumption becomes an unavoidable aspect of the construction of our life forms, we lost the hope the avant-gardes had of using art as a means of liberating life. Once production is discredited, degraded, and delocalized, one can no longer moralize about anything concerning consumption. There's no pride left in being a worker or someone who contributes to the general productivity, because we are first and foremost consumers who, by the way, can never obtain what they want. I mean, it's clear how the art world situates itself in relationship to this problem. Fetishism is the avowed motor of any transaction. Remixing as a paradigm of productive activity, now that's pathetically banal. Everyone says that production takes place through assembly and the transformation of pre-existing fragments. That's always been the case. But now we all have virtually free access to almost all forms of history and geography. Creation has turned into an increasingly vulgar, idiotic, and less magical activity. That's one of the disenchanting effects of capitalism. What else can I say? It's not up to us. There are also fair impressions, of course, but they don't stop collectors or challenge the art market in any way. So, appropriation, if such a thing exists, it's not what I'm up to. Instead, I'm trying to practice expropriation, to create a sharing, an accessibility, a political reinvestment of what I am producing. I annex nothing of myself as a subject. I only steal to redistribute.
People say that the most remarkable artists today are those who invent other ways of manipulating and formatting information. But sometimes it's hard to distinguish the pirates from the creative types. Maybe they are the same people. We are all symbol managers.
It's hard not to have sympathy for pirates, bandits, or thieves. These are romantic figures who've molded our desires for freedom since childhood. Creative types, on the contrary, are very shrewd and productive, calculating, much less sexy. Because if you are not shrewd and organized from the outset, the system rapidly changes you or spits you out even before it has a chance to swallow you. And afterward, as we all know, you no longer create anything. So no, these are not and never the same people. As far as information goes, I already consider it a byproduct, pre-mashed gibberish that can also be found in bits with independent media. But as Walter Benjamin said, information is often accompanied by barbarism. Manipulating this shit can help to make works recognizable and reassuring or even produce some pedagogical effect. But I don't think it's interesting.
How did Claire begin? As a feeling, an idea, a plan? What immediate conditions are you responding to?
Claire started by chance. There wasn't any strategy or career plan. Absolutely none at all. The initial conditions were a feeling of powerlessness, an incapacity to resist things that affect us. Our main feeling at the time was one of political impotency, of the impossibility of deploying practices of freedom in our professional and personal situation. Claire came to us as a space of immediacy, where we stopped pondering the pros and cons, where we stopped saying, but yes, and so, and then, etc. We created a field of formal intervention, a shared language, simple needs to satisfy, no goal outside of the continuation of the practice that gives us strength and pleasure. An immaterial space of communism in sum. It sounds very inoffensive, but in fact it's a form of displaced struggle. It's not easy to designate the enemy because that's also part of who we are, due to our complicity in the system that produces us as subjects. It's a kind of a guerrilla in the field of subjectivization, a practice that is meant to help us change ourselves.
Claire Fontaine's practice seems to revolve around the word foreigner. Could you say something about this concept, if indeed it is one, and how it informs or infects your activities and tactics?
The series of neon signs, Foreigners Everywhere, in several different languages, for example, is named after an anarchist collective from Turin that fights racism throughout its different activities. The ambivalence in their name made me wonder what might happen if it was physically and materially displaced into different sites and contexts. It's clear now that immigration and emigration are not simple epiphenomena linked to the economy. They are existential and perceptual experiences in their own right. As for the strangeness that we can all feel when faced with a world that is entirely fabricated and governed by senseless logics, that can certainly be a driving force in the struggle. The idea of the human strike borrows a lot from Bertolt Brecht, from what he described as a process of estrangement within the power relationships that constitute who we are, in order to produce events in this interval in the normal flow of things. I don't think there is anything coquettish about our use of different languages. It stems from the fact that we were born elsewhere and left for no particular reason, except the fact of no longer being at home. The contradictions, power relations, and violence that one's own language buries or blunts becomes manifest when you use a language that isn't your own. The struggle with meaning then gives forms to what Deleuze and Guattari claimed to find in Kafka, the foreign language within language. Basically, this is what artists are trying to speak. The promise of community rests solely in this impropriety.
Did you produce any art today?
No, I would prefer not to.
December 30th, 2003, California. Animal Liberation Brigade, HLS-related 10-pound ammonium nitrate bomb packed with nails left at Shackley.
February 27th, 2003, Berlin, Maryland. Animal Liberation Front, HLS-related 115 chickens liberated from
Santa Monica, California. Animal Liberation Front, home of the head of Animal Services for Los Angeles, vandalized. Jerry Greenwald's property and vehicle was splattered with red paint. October 8, 2003, Portland Mountains, New Mexico, Green Brigade, Liberation Front, construction actions belonging to the U.S. resulted in 8 delivery trucks and 2 trailers having tires.
I feel like we didn't have to say that again.
And slogans.
I feel like we shouldn't say that.
May 18, 2003, Los Angeles, California. Anonymous, HLS related. On visit to Jim Devico, customer service for tacos, doors, steps, and walkway covered in
construction equipment belonging to the U.S. Forest Service in the Chinese Mountains Liberation Front. Electrical wires cut, tires cut, and windows October 2000.
Portland, Maine.
Acadian Brigade. Earth Liberation Front. Action against Boys Cascade resulted in 8 delivery trucks and 2 trailers having tires punctured. Locks glued and slogans painted across the buildings.
2003, McAllen, Texas.
September 25th, 2003, Louisiana. Animal Liberation Front. An Animal Liberation Front action at the Louisiana State University Inhalation Toxicology Research Facility did a total of $300,000.
Should we say dollars?
I guess, yeah, it's true. Okay, one more time.
September 25th, 2003, Louisiana. Animal Liberation Front. An
Anonymous, HLS related, Office to Delois and Touche, vandalized anti-Huntington Life Sciences graffiti.
$300,000 in damages.
Earth Liberation
Equipment
Front.
used in experiments was destroyed and red paint was splashed on the floor, the walls, and a direct action against
July 20th, 2003, Animal Liberation Front, HLS related. Home visit to Daryl Dorsey, lobbyist for the Abbott Labs, client of HLS, home covered in paint and slogans.
September 30th,
July
2003, California. Animal Liberation Brigade. Anonymous. Sabotage at the site of a Walmart under construction in Martinsville, Indiana includes the pulling of survey stakes, graffiti, and sabotage of several pieces of equipment. November 3rd, 2003, New Hyde Park, Long Island. Animal Liberation Front. HLS.
July 27th, 2003, Santa Rosa, California. Anonymous. Home visit to Didier Jalbert, part owner of Sonoma
New Hyde Park,
45.
Long Island.
Red paint and glass etching
HLS
related to vandalized
visit to
home.
GW
Box
of
glue
Mellon
and
Investments
slogans,
resulted
spray
in
paint
damage. Smashed
March
windows.
23rd, 2003, Los Angeles, California. Anonymous, HLS-related, and anti-fur. 3 actions on the same evening saw windows broken at the home of Rodney Armstead, Medical Diagnostics Management, at E-Trade in Beverly Hills, and at Bobby Trendy Designs in protest of
November
fur
3rd,
sale.
2003, New Hyde Park, Long Island. Animal Liberation Front.
March 27th, 2003, San Diego, California. Animal Liberation Front, HLS-related. Home visit to Claire McDonald, representative for Huntington Life Sciences. Property vandalized with red paint and graffiti. Tires punctured on vehicle.
June 4th.
What are we going to sing?
Just sing and we'll just figure it out as we go.
Park,
Ready?
Long Island. Animal Liberation Front.
June
HLS related.
17th.
Home visit to GW of Mellon Investments resulted in damage, smashed windows, and spray painted slogans. Mellon cut their ties with HLS 2 days after this action. Action in memory of Barry Horn. For sale, signs, room 5th, 2003. August, Washington, New York, 2003. Animal Liberation, California. HLS related. Restaurant, home visit to law. Attack, unknown. Opposing, cruel. Oh, it's just that. Wasp. Concrete.
November
5th, 2003. Port Washington, New York. Several
Animal Liberation Front.
HLS related. Home visit to Yatsusugu Kawahara.
Assistant
To the president of Sumitomo America. Anti-HLS and anti-vivisection slogans spray painted around property. Action in memory of Barry Horn. November 7th, 2003. Asheville, North Carolina. Animal Liberation Front. 2 delivery vans belonging to Little Pig's Barbecue.
August 26th.
Ciao.
Okay, you ready?
August 6th.
They're so funny.
2003.
San Francisco,
November 7th.
California.
Asheville,
Anonymous.
November
17 Starbucks outlets vandalized with glue on windows. For lease, signs posted, and locks jammed and glued shut.
August 22nd.
November 7th, 2003. Asheville, North Carolina. Animal Liberation Front. 4 2 delivery vans belonging to Little Pig's Barbecue. 2.5 million. In West Covina. Through a GM
Red paint and glass. Etsy cream used to be in
November
lots of homes.
7th,
Lots of
2003. Asheville, North Carolina. Animal Liberation Front. 2 delivery vans belonging to Little Pig's Barbecue restaurant smashed up and painted with slogans. November 17th, 2003. Anonymous, HLS related. HLS CFO Richard Michelson's car damaged by paint stripper. November 30th, 2003.
February 25th.
Vegan dumpster militia.
HLS related.
What the fuck is the vegan dumpster militia?
Legacy trading.
For links to
March 25th, 2003. Petaluma, California.
2003.
Anonymous.
Vegan dumpster militia. HLS related.
$10,000 in damages. Beatty left behind red. Stop the
House covered in
killing.
dumpstered food. December 7th, 2003. Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. Anonymous, HLS related. Slogans painted in locks glued at
Sumitomo's
Sumitomo's regional office.
in Pennsylvania.
2003.
December 7th.
Yeah.
California.
December 7th, 2003. Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. Anonymous, HLS related. Slogans painted in locks glued at Sumitomo's regional office in Pennsylvania.
$1 million in damage.
Yeah.
23rd, 2003.
December 9th.
Piedmont, California. Anonymous HLS related. Visitor short. VP at Sharon.
December 9th.
Linked to HLS. Car windows with glass.
Piece of equipment has dirt.
December 9th.
Late one night, I sat on a small patch of grass under the stars, listening to the dried leaves rustle in the wind. A few moments had passed when I saw the headlights of a small vehicle turn the corner and head towards me. After loading my gear in the trunk, I climbed in the front seat and exchanged anxious smiles with the driver. She gave my hand a quick squeeze before steering the car, rented in an untraceable manner, back on the road. We were on our way. As we drove, the sun came up. Stopping only to eat and refuel the car, we continued driving all day. A few hours after the sun disappeared, we met up with another man well known to us and trusted wholeheartedly. Together we headed to a dark clearing near a small lake and sat and discussed our plans. Afterwards, taking special care to be sure we didn't have unwelcome company, we hit the road and headed for our final destination. Using detailed maps, we made many turns off the main road. We found the address we were looking for and quickly found some thick brush where we hid the car from sight. We had brought with us a radio scanner which had already been programmed to monitor all the local and state law enforcement frequencies. One of my comrades double-checked that it was working and the controls were set appropriately, secured it in her jacket pocket, and inserted the small earphone in her left ear, leaving the other ear unobstructed. Throughout the reconnaissance and the raid, she would listen carefully in case a farmer or a neighbor reported any suspicious activity, or in case an undetected alarm caused an officer to be dispatched to the farm. We also made sure that no one was carrying any loose articles, wearing jewelry, or anything else that could inadvertently be left behind. The last thing we did was hide the door key near the car so no one person would be carrying it. If that person should run into trouble, the others would have no mode of transportation. Our pockets were empty except for the scanner, flashlight, and gloves. We were ready to go. Our team knew how important it was to be familiar with the area, so we scouted on foot for about an hour. Of course, while on or near roads, anytime we heard or saw a car in the distance, we hit the ground or bush and made ourselves invisible. We located a creek which ran through the area nearby and out to open, wilder spaces. We also made note of the darkest areas for hiding and which side of the country road was least lit. We set up an emergency rendezvous point in case we were separated. When the wind was just right, it carried the stench of the fur farm to us, an overwhelming assault on our senses. When I inhaled, I could taste the blood and filth, I could hear the cries of pain, I could see the suffering, and I could feel the terror of this place. It was and is pure evil. We cut across several large fields to get to the back fence of the mink farm. When walking in open spaces, we hunched over and let our arms hang down so that if anyone was watching, we wouldn't look human. As we traveled, we often had to pull strands of barbed wire apart and squeeze through to get past perimeter fences. We made friends with the many cows and other animals we passed on our way to the farm. After checking for alarms, tripwires, and video cameras, we easily climbed the back fence and entered the concentration camp. Still watching carefully for alarms, etc., we hurried through the many sheds. Our presence brought the many thousands of mink to attention. They became very excited, rustling around their tiny cages and talking to each other with short, high-pitched squeaks. With our small flashlights, we could see their curious little faces and inquisitive eyes. Truly beautiful creatures. I imagined the fate that would have awaited them if we had not come to intervene. Their necks snapped or their lungs filled with gas after a few more months of enduring the psychological and physical torture of being in prison in this hell. We took note of the cages, 4 rows in each shed. Filthy, corroded cages which provided no bedding for mink that normally nest in the wild. Simple latches held most cages shut, but then some, the breeders, had a piece of heavy gauge wire twisted around the wires of the cage, securing the doors. Our reconnaissance told us what we needed to know, and we retreated to the back of the field that ran behind this farm. We sat under an old willow tree for a few hours, watching the compound to see if anyone was aware of our intrusion. On this evening, we would leave the critters behind, but we would return. We hiked through the fields and creeks back to the vehicle and drove for about an hour. We then camped for the remainder of the morning. At mid-morning, we rose and began to further discuss a plan of action, detailing tools we would need and delegating duties. We had brought with us a radio scanner, dark disposable clothing, flashlights, wire cutters, gloves, spray paint, and ski masks. We would need to purchase packaged envelopes, paper, and stamps to send a communique after the action, as well as backup batteries. We fueled up the car and drove by our target once, and only once, during the daylight to further familiarize ourselves with the surroundings. The rest of the afternoon/evening was spent taking apart all our equipment and wiping it down inside and out. We went over every detail of the plan in our heads and prepared ourselves mentally for whatever we might encounter, including any consequences we might face. It began to rain. We double-checked our inventory of equipment and then set out. We made our way back to the concentration camp, again making sure we were not followed. Just like the night before, we checked and secured the scanner, emptied our pockets, and hid the key to the vehicle. Again, we followed the road part way, diving to the ground with the coming of headlights, and then crept through the dark, still fields towards the many mink awaiting their freedom. We opened the cages. After opening roughly a dozen cages in the dark, I paused for a brief moment to shine my flashlight across them and caught sight of a shiny, sleek figure hopping out of her hellhole. The mink scurried across the ground and out of the barn. While I wanted to focus and appreciate each and every animal as they found their way to freedom, I knew I couldn't do so at the expense of those who would be left behind. I had to spend every moment on the farm opening cages to allow as many as possible, fighting chance at a natural life. I continued my work, frantically unlatching and cutting wires. While I worked, several mink ran across the top of the cages while others scurried about my feet, squeaking with joy. Before long, these feisty critters were all over the place, running this way and that, playing and fighting with each other. Now and then I would briefly stop my work to separate two of the little guys and shoo them towards the outer fences, where they would find their freedom. Run, little guys, run! Suddenly I heard, or thought I heard, a slamming noise. The mink have woken the farmers, I thought. Here he comes. I looked to the end of the barn towards the farmer's house. Struggling to adjust my focus for such a distance in the darkness, I made out a light-colored, upright figure. Were my eyes playing tricks on me, or was someone standing there? I grew very uneasy and almost nauseous as I imagined Farmer John, angry as a wasp, evicted from her nest, but much more dangerous, standing in the doorway, holding a rifle. Better safe than sorry, I reminded myself and quickly left the shed. I looked for my partners, and not finding them, my anxiety increased. I moved across the adjacent field and hid in some thick, dark bushes, and watched the farm for about 20 minutes. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, and no lights were turned on, so I eventually crept back and cautiously re-entered the compound. I ducked into the sheds where my friends were working. To be certain that all was well, I found them working away undeterred. I went back to my shed and continued opening the cages. The work was exhausting, and I could feel my bones ache with the monotony of the routine, but I kept going. I could never live with myself if I didn't open as many cages as was humanly possible. I lost count at 500. I finished my shed and checked on the others to see if they needed help. Finding their sheds empty, I moved on to the next one, and we finished that one off together. Sadly, we came to our pre-designated cutoff time. Though there were many more sheds full of prisoners, we had to leave. The farmer would wake soon, and the rise of the sun would provide no cover for ours and the mink's escape. We marked some of the now empty sheds with spray paint and then retreated. As we fled, we chased many mink to the holes cut in the fence. Once on the other side, we stopped for a moment to watch the many dark figures gliding and scampering through the fields towards the creek which would lead them to their new prospective homes. Using the moon as our guide, we found our way back to our hidden vehicle. We briefly shared our experiences as we walked. One of our team had been bitten while attempting to open a cage. All of us had found several mink, dead and decaying, in their cages. I would I were a weed. We piled our soaked, sore, and muddied bodies into the car. We made frustrated faces at each other, and we were excited but knew we could not talk in the car. We drove silently back down the dark roads to our campsite, where we sorted out our things, throwing all clothes and shoes into the campfire and placing tools into bags to be discarded safely and immediately. We talked a little more about our experiences, including what we could do better next time. We made our plans to meet again and shared warm hugs before embarking on our long journey home. During the following day's drive, we heard news reports of the raid on the radio. We smiled proudly with satisfaction that many mink had a chance at freedom that day, that the fur trade had just become a little less profitable, and that Farmer John just might go out of business.
Okay. Es un buen tipo, mi viejo, que anda solo y esperando. Tiene la tristeza larga de tanto venir andando. Yo lo miro desde lejos, pero somos tan distintos.
background here. We have Emily Sunblad taking us out. Before we call it a show, I'd like to shout out to Elizabeth.
Viejo mi querido viejo, ahora ya camina largo, como perdonando al viento. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu silencio y tu tiempo. Él tiene los ojos buenos y una figura pesada. La edad se le vino encima, sin carnaval ni comparsa. Yo tengo los años nuevos y el hombre los años viejos. El dolor lo lleva dentro y tiene historia sin tiempo. Viejo mi querido viejo, ahora ya camina largo, como perdonando al viento. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu silencio y tu tiempo. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu silencio y tu tiempo. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu silencio y tu tiempo. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu silencio y tu tiempo. Yo soy tu sangre, mi viejo, soy tu